Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener in the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Can you believe that March is right upon us?
Here we are. Happy Leap Day, Don.
Yeah, happy Leap Day to you,
I don't know how people celebrate Leap Day necessarily. I see that there's some some sales with 29 cents on things.
Yeah, that's kind of neat. Yeah, I've noticed that too. Do you know anybody whose birthday is today?
I think I had heard that Boyd Christensen.
I was just going to say Boyd Christensen, a longtime radio, TV personality, a great guy.
Yep.
On his programs, he always celebrated his birthday.
Every 4 years.
Leap year, yeah. So he always enjoyed saying when he was, 60, he was like, 30 or whatever.
Like that.
Or 15, whatever it amounts to. So he was a young man at age 60.
Yes, young at heart, where it counts. Here we are. We're celebrating Leap Day, but we're coming off a late. We did have a blizzard. It was a blizzard, right?
Yes, technically.
Technically, it was a blizzard because of the winds.
It was nasty.
And we went from, what did we go from 60 degrees on Monday, I think to then we went below zero.
Right.
And then we've had about 48 hours of below 10 degrees. And now today we'll be going back up to the 40s, and it'll be 40s. And
so during that blizzard, when the wind was howling and the snow was blowing, I was thinking about our poor plants.
Yeah.
Although I was happy our perennial plants, perennial flowers, anywhere where they caught some snow, of course, that was good insulation before the temperature dropped down. But I was kind of concerned about our trees.
Yeah, and so we've talked about this a lot.
Right.
The kind of what this means for plants that are already budding out, trees that are already budding out. And so what we thought we'd do this week is, because this has just been a goofy winter, right?
Yeah, and lots of questions come in because of it.
Non-scientific term there, a goofy winter, but this is a hard one to for us to navigate. So we thought that we would you've picked out some questions that you've been getting or that you've been coming across, people have been sending you, or just things that you've overheard.
Right, and a lot of them are weather related because of the winter we've had.
Yeah, and you were just at the Yard and Garden Show this past weekend?
Yeah, up at the Fargo Dome, the Home and Garden Show. Right.
So you've been out, you've been listening to people, you've been hearing, kind of taking the pulse on what people have. So we're going to kind of go over some questions.
Great. And it's always so interesting. Some of these questions came to me from the Home and Garden Show, and others were emailed in. So thanks to everybody that asked questions, and always fascinating.
Yeah, and so if we'll at the end of the show, as we always do, we'll give your address, or if people have more questions, they can reach out to you, and hopefully they'll get their answers.
Yes.
All right, so this is the first question. This is from Carolyn. She asks, what do you think the warm winter followed by the cold is going to do for our trees and shrubs? So
and that's the question that's been on all of our minds, because, we probably won't make the record non-snowy winter because we had a few inches this last, few days ago. But still, we had such weeks and weeks with no snow, and it was warm, it was mild. I don't remember anything, there's never two winters that are precisely the same, but I sure don't remember one as mild as this. And a concern that we've discussed before is what happens when things start waking up. What happens if trees, sap starts flowing, then we get cold like we did, what happens? And of course, none of us know, even the tree researchers don't really know what might happen, but we can relate this back a little bit to some things that we do know. So a couple of years ago, we had what Forester Joe Zalesnik, who was on our program a month or so ago, what he called the midwinter fake-out. We had probably a week or more of nice mild temperatures during, I think it was probably February, and birch trees, which are very quick to start sap flowing. Well, the birch trees must have thought it was spring, and the sap started flowing within those birch trees. And then when the cold weather returned again, we didn't see anything at that time in February. But then in May, when things normally start leafing out, trees start budding out, the birch trees, many of them, especially the hybrid types, did not leaf out. The upper 2/3 of many were dead. and that part never did recover. I mean, dead is dead, and the bottom part was maybe still alive, but the trees were ruined. And so then in May, when we saw that destruction, we related that back to that midwinter fake out that birch experienced. And so the big question is on a lot of our other trees, maybe the better adapted trees, that have a longer dormancy, that don't get quite faked out like the birch did. But we've had a really mild winter. What if more of our trees, more tree types got faked out and sap started flowing? And, of course, we won't know that really until things really start leafing out in the spring. There's nothing at all we can do about anything. But if we do have increased damage, and when I say increased damage, lots of dead branches and dead upper parts of trees or shrubs. And so if we see that, we can certainly relate it back to this mild winter. And if sap and activity started happening in those trees because they thought it was spring. So we'll have to kind of remember this if we see more damage. I hope not. I hope everything's going to be just fine. Our better adapted trees do have that natural dormancy. They have to have a certain amount of winter, short days, cool temperatures in order to wake back up. So I'm hoping that they did not receive that until things are going to be okay.
Now, I know that you don't have all the answers for this, but do you think is the area concern, you talked about the birch and how the birch have sap flowing, is this mostly for trees that have sap flowing, or is rather that just kind of an indicator? Is that cause or effect?
Yeah, that's an indicator that the tree has started spring activity. And about a month ago, University of Minnesota indicated that sap was flowing in maple trees because some maple trees were starting to be tapped for syrup, which was probably a month and a half ahead of the normal March time. And that was like the beginning of February or so. And so once those trees start to wake up, and when I say wake up, sap starts flowing, the roots maybe become active, and they're getting ready to burst their buds and start leafing out, and instead of being dormant. And so then when they've started that internal activity and we get cold again, maybe cells can rupture, because they've already started growth. They're not just dormant sitting there, but activity, then cells could rupture and result in death. So that's the biggest cause, is if these things woke up and started activity only to be set back again.
So I know that we have trees that they were starting to form buds on our boulevard, so I guess we're just going to keep an eye on them.
Yeah, exactly. If the buds were still tight, they're probably going to be okay. But I know some people indicated that their flowering crab apples, for instance, they said the buds started to open, and I asked, did you see color yet? I was hoping the answer would be no, but they said the flower buds were starting to show color. And that's a great concern because at a certain point, if those buds open far enough, they're not going to be shielded from the cold.
They're really vulnerable.
If those bud scales are still tight, there's at least some protection. And one of the biggest concerns, I should say, is with our fruit trees. If the fruit trees, because of the nice mild winter we've had, if they start to open up and the flower buds on fruit trees, if they start to open up early, such as in April instead of in May, our apple trees usually bloom sometime middle May, towards the end of May. And that's nature's way of generally protecting them from frost, because flower buds are really, really sensitive. Frost will kill them and then no fruit. And if apple trees this year, or other fruit trees, started to open their flower buds in April, there would be a high chance that they'd get killing frost. Because we really don't get past our comfortable frost-free date until sometime, mid-May or so? Yeah. And I mean, it's always possible to get frost after that. But opening in April is almost a recipe for disaster. And apple or other fruit blossoms, once they're killed by frost, that would be it for the fruit for that season. Okay. They don't have they don't really have a secondary fruit bud that can open.
I suppose it's similar to like when you hear about there's this freakish frost in Florida and they talk about the orange groves down there, they're
correct.
Well, they're I think actually sometimes they're actually fruit on the trees, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we could potentially, let's hope not, but we could potentially see a year with no apple crop if those were to open early.
So we're talking about trees. Jay has a question about flowers. He says, our tulips are starting to grow. Anything we should do?
Tulips, of course, with the mild weather we've had and the soil starting to warm up, tulips and other spring flowering bulbs like to peek out of the soil. The good thing is that they're really cold hardy. They've come up through pretty chilly soil, and they'll take down to, well, at least 0. We went down to 10 below?
Yeah.
So a person could see a little bit of browning on the leaf edges, but the flower buds are still down below soil. So I think they're going to be okay. Tulips are very resilient. They'll take more cold than sometimes we'll even give them credit for. So in most cases, I think they're okay, which is a good case for not planting them next to the house foundation because that always warms up early.
Warm, yeah.
And so I learned that the hard way. And so we plant our tulips away from the house so that they come up more at a time when there'd be less chance of them getting frozen.
Okay. All right. Somebody has a question. Some of these days have been so nice. Would this be a good time to do some pruning?
Yes. Sometime a person is doing your pruning of shrubs or maybe apple trees, other things. You're doing it when, there's a lot of snow on the ground. You almost need snowshoes to get out there to do the pruning, or the stuff is buried under snow. And we've had a nice winter. A person shouldn't really do the pruning until late winter is the recommended. But March, upcoming March here would be a good month to do pruning on some of these nice days. So you don't have to do pruning on cold days. As long as the plants are dormant, the trees, shrubs, go ahead and prune away. I suppose, enjoy it on these nice days. There's nothing bad with doing it when it's comfortable to us. It's not like we need to wait till it's cold.
Yeah,
for the tree or shrub.
If there's no snow on the ground, but it's still cool, then you're kind of a little bit easier access, I think, too, to getting to things.
Exactly.
Speaking of pruning, there was one on a recent radio program you were asked, what are some of the things people could be doing around their yard and garden on some of these nice days?
Yeah, so on these nice days, if you get the itch to be out and doing something, pruning is probably the number one thing that we could do. And a couple of things, if you've got some shrubs that have just gotten a little bit bigger than you'd like, you could do some trimming back. Or if you've got a shrub that has really got overgrown and woody and no longer looks nice, the classic is dogwood. After a number of years, 10 years, 12 years, they get so woody and no longer have the nice bright red stems. And so cutting them way back, a rejuvenation down to about 4 to 6 inches above ground level, they'll come back better than ever. So now, March would be a good time to do that, or early April, but before they leaf out. Lilacs, you can do that with. Potentilla, the yellow flower potentilla, that get kind of scraggly, spirea. Any of the leafy type shrubs can be cut back. I should mention, though, if it's a flowering shrub that flowers in the spring, such as lilac, if you want to have them bloom yet the spring, then delay the pruning until after they're done blossoming. You see, one reason why lilacs have, when you look at them this time of year, they have such big fat buds because those flowers are inside that bud. So they have to be kind of big. And so as soon as lilac leaves start opening, the flowers aren't far behind because those buds are already preformed, which means if we do early spring pruning, we're cutting off those flower buds. So then you lose this spring's bloom. But if you want to rejuvenate an old lilac, and if you want it to come back nice and full and healthy again, we're less concerned about this year's blossoming. So it's healthier for the shrub on a rejuvenation if you do it before it wastes energy leafing out.
What about, talk about pruning, what about on some things like evergreens, like arborvitae, or what do they call it, the yews or some things like that? They kind of grow out, and they can, after time, they can get rather long. Is it a good time, or should we wait until it warms up for those?
Yeah, that's a good question I had at the Home and Garden Show, and that was, when's a good time to do the evergreens. Is that kind of the same time when things are kind of dormant? And the answer is no. Evergreens are best pruned when they're in active growth. So spruce trees, the evergreens with about a 1-inch long needled. Spruce trees are usually best pruned when they've just started kind of a little bit of active growth. So May. And pines with the longer needled send out a finger-like candle at the end of the branches. And when that candle is still kind of intact, looking almost like a finger, then you can just prune some of that back. And arborvitae with the soft, flat needles, those are a little more, give and take as to when you prune. You could prune those May, June, almost any time you want to trim. The yews that you mentioned, Y-E-W, is not you as in you, John, but Y-E-W, are one of the evergreens that tolerate shade fairly well. They do well on the east side and maybe north side. And those can be trimmed also in May, early June. So evergreens, we wait until some growth has already started.
So we talked about birch, maple earlier. How about pruning them now?
They are the exception to the rule that you prune trees when they're dormant. So birch and maple, because they start flowing the sap so early, if you do the pruning in spring while they're kind of dormant, they're actually starting to flow sap pretty soon. And that sap will ooze out of the pruning cuts and kind of makes a mess. You've got this sticky stuff flowing all the way down. Kind of relate that to maples. When they start tapping them for maple syrup, you'll have kind of maple syrup running all the way down your trees. So anyway, birch and maple, since they do have that early heavy sap flow, it is recommended that you wait with pruning those until after they've leafed out. The leaves have fully expanded out. Then the sap flow isn't such a heavy push and they won't be kind of bleeding all over the place. It doesn't really hurt the tree. You can tap a maple and get lots of gallons of sap out of a tree. So it won't kill the tree, but it kind of makes it a little messy. And you've got that sap down on the trunk and it just doesn't look as nice.
And also if you have the sap there, that may also attract things that are kind of unwanted.
You're probably right. Yeah, you could get ants or other things kind of crawling around. And so birch and maple wait until the leaves have fully expanded.
How about, we were talking about wanting to get out and do some yard work with the nice weather. What about in the perennial garden? What to do out there?
Yeah, it would be tempting to go out and cut back the perennials. We recommended when we talked in the fall about fall things, we recommended leaving the above ground portions of perennials intact because it does catch the snow. What little snow we had kind of catches them. And there are little native bee pollinators that make their nest in those hollow stems of perennials, and they're still in there. So if we cleaned up the perennial garden too soon, we're getting rid of those nice little pollinators that are going to give us good cucumber crops and good apple crops. And so it's better to wait with cleaning up the perennial garden yet. Early April is fine. The main thing is that we get those cleaned up. And when I say clean up, you cut off the above ground portions just a little above ground. And the main thing is that we do that before the new growth starts from the perennials. Perennials start the new growth from the base, kind of that crown where the stems meet roots. And if you wait too long, the new growth will get tangled up in the old dry stems, and then you go cut those back, and you're kind of cutting off new growth too. So the main thing is you just keep an eye on it. Usually early April. I have no idea this year when new growth is going to start on perennials, but just keep an eye and make sure you get those top parts cut back, the above ground parts cut back before the new growth starts. So now the question is, okay, at what point do those little pollinator bees that we really need, what point do they exit those stems so we're sure that we aren't going to kill them? And so what is recommended is whenever you do cut those above ground portions off, just stick them behind the garage somewhere until maybe late May. Weather's nice and warm. Those little pollinators will have exited, and then at that point you can deal with those things. Either throw them in the garbage or compost them. Yeah. What do you do with all your stuff that you cut off?
We did start composting when we first moved into the house, and I got so behind in it that it just it wasn't really
Sure.
compost. So what we do is we have buckets, yard waste buckets, and then bring those either over to the recycling area by us, or check and see when we're in Moorhead, check and see when the city will come around and start picking up those yard waste buckets.
Sure.
But yeah, we generally don't throw them away unless it's things like, later, when we know for sure that they're invasive weeds.
Yeah,
or
exactly. Or if some of the things, if they've been diseased, if peony tops that have a lot of mildew or something on, then it's good just to get rid of those. One other alternative that I should mention that's kind of fun in the spring is the chop and drop method for perennial tops. And of course, a person would probably want to do that after it's warm enough and the little bees have probably exited. But you can, if the foliage and everything was clean, some of these stems, if you have a wood-type mulch around your perennials, you can just chop up those stems and put them back on as a mulch. They do work quite well for that even. I've noticed that we have shredded bark that's kind of different consistencies. And so some of the kind of woodier type perennials, I actually just chop them up and kind of leave them right around there.
I know there's some hostas that I didn't get to last year, and those, of course, are always the bigger the leaf, the bigger the slime. So I suppose
I love it. Yeah, the bigger leaf, the bigger the slime. Yes, because there's nothing slimier in the spring of the year.
That is like my least. The spring cleanup doesn't bother me, but hostas, that is the one, because you really have to get low on them, and they're always a mess. It's the dirtiest thing to clean up.
Exactly. That's one of the things that we do recommend cleaning up in the fall of the year after they've frozen. Exactly that, and iris. Iris are kind of just ploppy and awful. That's a good scientific term too, ploppy, come spring. And peonies are always advised to cut back in the fall because diseases tend to winter on those leaves. And daylilies, they just kind of lay flat under any snow, so I like to get those cut back in the fall too. But the rest, anything that has kind of a good stemmy structure, including the ornamental grasses. Speaking of ornamental grasses, it is important to get those cut back each year. That's a common question. Some people wonder, are you supposed to just kind of leave that? But no, it becomes almost like a tight, like an old hay field or something. And so it is best each year before the new growth starts to cut off that old dead
things like stuff. The Carl Forster.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I've got a new perennial grass that I bought at one of the local garden centers this year called Korean feather grass.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so it's fun. The garden centers have all kinds of new, that's my little pitch for different types of ornamental grasses. There's some really nice ones.
I think I'm going to be trying some in some flower pots, maybe some taller flower pots, just to try something different. Well, we're talking here about the yard, and I know people are going to want to have lots of questions about the lawn, and we'll get to those. But first, let's take a quick little break.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, we're back, and we're dealing with some questions. We're answering some questions that Donna has been asked or has been hearing a lot lately regarding to this kind of weird winter weather. And now all of a sudden,
weird on our lawns.
Yeah, and now here we are basically it'll be March by the time people are listening to this. Spring is or summer is just around the corner. Spring seems like it's already here.
I can't believe a winter in which I could see my lawn grass almost the whole winter.
I know.
I could have mowed it in December.
Yeah.
With rain on it at Christmas time.
Well, so some questions. Here's one. This is from Jake. He said, we didn't do any dormant seeding on our lawn in the fall. Could we spread grass seed now?
Okay, well,
now being, so we're talking early
March
he asked this maybe
in
February, but we're talking early mid-March.
Right. And of course, dormant seeding is when a person applies grass seed late in the fall, so it won't sprout, but it will lay there under the snow and be all ready to go for spring. So that's what dormant seeding is. But the key point of that is laying there under the snow. And because the snow gives just kind of protection, and then when the soil warms up in the spring, it'll be all there and ready to start growing. But Okay, I can appreciate kind of the sentiment that, well, I didn't get it done there. Yeah, maybe do it now. But the problem is it might not have snow to give it protection. And of course, the sparrows are going to quickly find that because grass seed is just basically spread on the surface because it needs light to germinate. And so it's barely worked or scratched into the surface. And the sparrows are going to probably quickly find that nice meal. And there'd be no advantage at this point to seeding versus waiting. The grass seed won't sprout until the soil gets up to about 50, 55 degrees. And so I would probably wait unless you're really gambling that we're going to get some good snow here that's going to stay, but I hope not.
I would also add, too, that the big component in seeding is you need water. And you don't want to hook up your hose just yet because you don't know if we're going to go through another freeze. And, and the wet, it
won't sprout anyway until the soil gets warm. So I would wait probably until end of April, first part of May.
Yeah.
And watch the soil. When I say soil temperatures, I look up, I do an online search for NDAWN, NDAWN, North Dakota Agriculture Weather Network. And that has a chart with all the locations around North Dakota and western Minnesota, and it tells what the soil temperature is doing at 2 inches, 4 inches, 8 inches, 12 inches. So you can see how much frost is in the ground, and you can see how the soil is warming up. So if the soil was starting to get maybe in the 40s, it would be time to, at the 2 to 4 inch depth, then it would be time to seed grass. But right now, seeding it now, there's really no advantage, and I'm afraid it could blow. Or the birds could peck away at it. So the advantage of doing it in the fall is that it would lay there under the protection of the snow.
Yeah.
Which I hope we don't have anymore.
Another lawn questions. This is from Ron. He asks, some areas of our lawn started to green up. Is it going to be damaged?
I don't think so. Our lawns are so adapted. In the fall of the year, even after we've had frosts, the grass stays fairly green. I don't think it's going to kill the grass. Winter kill is a possibility on grass, and we haven't had a winter like this, exactly like this. And I don't feel it's going to be damaged. I probably wouldn't give you 100% certainty that something couldn't go wrong. There's nothing you can really do. Keep an eye on it. If it does get thinned out, if we do have some damage to that lawn, and then later on, if it just looks thin, then it would be time to fertilize well and maybe oversee it in May. But I have a feeling it's probably going to be okay.
Oh, when would be a good time to look at fertilizing?
Around Memorial Day.
Okay.
Yep, 2 times a year, easy to remember because they're holidays. One is Memorial Day and the other is Labor Day in September. And the reason for waiting until Memorial Day is because we want the grass to green up, and then at that point it's able to use the nutrition that we give it through fertilizing. The old philosophy used to be fertilize early to get the grass to green up, to kind of force it to green up. But that was like force feeding. And it really didn't do as good a job because some of it could be washed off with spring rains. And so waiting until the grass is already greened up, maybe you've mowed a time or two by Labor Day, probably, by Memorial Day. And then apply around Memorial Day is the time when it's been found that the grass can actually use and need that fertilizer.
Okay. This is a question from Tom. In the past, I've had problems with voles in the lawn, but this year I don't see any problem with voles in the lawn. How can you prevent damage?
Well, I took a walk around in February around our yard and garden. I took a walk around that I usually take around in April after the snow is all gone. Then it's fun to get out, see what it's doing. But it's interesting. I could take that walk in February because there had been no snow before this last few inches. And so I could size everything up, the walk I usually do much later. And so I was happy to see no vole damage. And of course, the voles, those little kind of field mice, they do their most damage under the cover of snow. When we get generous snow, they can work there all winter long. And they tunnel along the surface of grass. They eat away at the grass crowns and leave a bunch of mess and big meandering channels, and then when the snow is all gone in the spring, you see that they've been working under there all winter, and the grass comes back, but in the meantime, it makes a mess. So I was happy this year to see, on our lawn anyway, no vole damage, probably the least I've seen in, I don't know, the last 6-7 years, and mostly because they had nowhere to hide. I suspect predators probably could get at them, or the voles were just so shy to go out into the open like that. They're maybe cowering underneath our porch somewhere. And so I was happy to see. But, okay, what if in a year where we do get our normal snow, what can we do? In the fall of the year, it's important to mow the lawn a little shorter than you do all summer long. 3 inches is the recommended summer length. And in the fall of the year, reduce that to 1.5 to 2 inches. Then there will be less habitat for the voles to work on all winter long. The other thing that I like to do in the perimeters, kind of out and around where the voles are probably hiding during the day in the fall of the year and stuff, I like to put sections of PVC pipe, maybe 18 inches long, and put rodent bait or traps in that. That protects it from kids and pets, and the voles seem to like to tunnel into things. And so they'll go in and find that bait, and it will reduce. Did you know that a female vole can have up to 4,000 little babies in the course of one winter?
My gosh.
Yeah, isn't that something? Some years I think they've had all those in our yard. And also, when a little vole is only a month old, it can start having new little babies. And so these do go in population cycles. And we've had a lot of, it's definitely been a build-up cycle over the last number of years.
You know, just kind of jumping off a little bit there, but since we're talking about kind of pests in the yard, one thing I've heard of is that people were saying that they started seeing wood ticks, or there was reports of wood ticks being out, and other people saying like maybe they've seen yellow jackets out because it had been so warm. Do you think, is there a chance that those populations, if they were active early, if they were starting to come out, that they would be killed off by this frost? I mean, is there a potential that this year could be different in any way, better for pest control? You know,
that is fascinating. We need to get the entomologists on as guests. But in kind of thinking about that, there are two things to that question. And one is, if some of the insects kind of woke up a little, then we got cold, did it, knock them off? I suppose that's a possibility if they were already woke up. But the other thing, so that would be kind of a good thing on some of the insects that are annoying or nuisance. The other part of that is with the mild winter and frost didn't go very deep and it wasn't frozen very cold, some of the invasive insects like Japanese beetles, emerald ash borer, the things that winter here had a pretty mild winter. So we could see some of those invasives being able to invade further and multiply more rapidly because less of them might have died this winter. And so it's going to be interesting. The Japanese beetle, which is a rounded beetle, eats about 300 crops, everything from alfalfa to beans to roses. And that's a very serious insect in a lot of parts, but it hasn't really gotten a toehold in North Dakota yet because of the cold, but it's being found to have overwintered the last couple of winters.
Well, let's move on to another question. From going outdoors to going indoors, this is a question about seedlings. And Sandy writes, I want to start some plants indoors under lights. How many hours should they be left on each day?
That's a great question. The easiest way that I remember how long lights should be left on is we can give plants the same amount of sleep that we're supposed to get, which is we're supposed to be getting 8 hours a night. And so plants, if we give them the same amount, 8 hours of darkness, so 16 hours on and 8 hours off is an easy way for me to remember. I also got a question about someone whose tomato plants just were looking so poorly. They were so tall and spindly and wondering what they should do. And of course, one reason, we all got the itch to start early because the weather, it looked like spring all winter almost. And so they had started them too early. The preferred start time on tomatoes indoors is April 1st. And once they get tall, spindly, lanky, there's not a great deal you can do. If they'll hold on well enough, you can plant them deeply out in the garden, but better to start April 1st. Otherwise, that's what happens to them indoors. They just get too tall, too spindly, and they wanted to be outdoors long ago.
You've said that there was a number of seedlings that you were looking at starting on or around March 1st. Are you ready to go? Is it all systems go for you?
Yes. Petunias.
Yes.
Petunias are March 1st, and then peppers will be the middle of March. And what else? Then zinnias, I don't start until April.
Okay.
Begonias, which needed a long, long time, I started those in February, early February. So right now, those are the only things I've got going is begonias, but by the time anybody hears this, I will have started petunias.
Some questions about house plants. Brenda asks, my snake plant has developed twisted leaves that are bending. How can I remedy this?
And Brenda sent in a photo, and when I looked at the photo, a couple of things I noticed. One was that the snake plant was being grown on a kind of a coffee table out in the kind of a corner of the room. And snake plant will take relatively low light, but they would prefer stronger light. You know, they're a tropical type succulent, so used to fairly high light. And I don't think they were getting quite as much light as they would like. They were in a fairly crowded in a pot, which snake plant like that. But I think the twisting and the bending over, I think was probably a result of not enough light. If she'd moved those closer to the window, I think it would be better. I also got a similar email from a reader to the garden column. She had responded back when I answered the previous question. And so a nice person wrote in, sent me a photo of their snake plant, which was absolutely beautiful. It was crowded in the pot, very crowded. You know, snake plant grows with all these kind of sword-shaped leaves, and they quickly crowd out the pot. Well, anyway, hers looked very beautiful, even though they were crowded. But the key was that she had them growing right in the window. She had good high light for those, and they were absolutely beautiful. And
so they were to reach upright rather than
splaying outward a little bit. Yeah,
twisting.
So I think increased light would help.
We recently talked about cactus, and Ashley had a question about cactus. She said, our prickly pear cactus has developed brown lesions or spots. We suspect we're over-fertilizing. Could that be it?
Yes, and they actually diagnosed the problem themselves.
Okay.
When they sent the photo, prickly pear cactus don't have leaves. They have those big kind of oval stem pads like that. But anyway, there were big round spots, lesions on these pads. Well, anyway, when I kind of took a look, leaves or stem sections have what are called stomates, in botany. Thinking back to my botany, those are kind of the pores, the open pore in leaves. They're really, really tiny, but that's where you have the oxygen and air exchange, and excess water evaporates out through these stomates. It's kind of the breathing pore of a leaf or cactus stems. And if a plant is getting too much of something, it will sometimes exude stuff out of those stomates to try to push the excess out. And if it does that often enough, that stomate can get kind of infected and then actually start a brown lesion around that. So when I looked at that, it looked like the cactus was trying to get rid of some of the fertilizer, or because when I looked at it. So anyway, what led me to believe, though, when they asked, do you think we're over-fertilizing it? Right away I thought, well, cactus, as we discussed in last week's cactus succulent thing, we discussed that those plants grow where the soil is very poor and low fertility. And so they rarely, if ever, need to be fertilized. And so I think they were probably over-fertilizing, and that was causing the stomates to kind of rupture and develop those brown lesions on that. So I suggested that they maybe repot, because the soil probably had a lot of fertilizer in it, build up maybe. maybe. And so I suggested repotting it into a good cactus type mix, which would be almost a sandy type of mix. And the interesting thing, though, is, okay, once those big pads had those brown lesions, they're not going to disappear. There's nothing that's going to kind of make those areas revert, just magically disappear again. So it's going to, for those pads to look good, and they did look pretty gross, it's going to depend on new growth coming. And then at some point, they could probably cut off those pads of prickly pear back kind of to the point at which they arose.
All right. Another houseplant question. This comes from Red. He writes, I'm trying to repair the deep headspace in our plants, as you suggested. It's difficult with some large plants. Any suggestions? And I'm just going to say, can you explain what deep headspace is?
Yes,
I'm not familiar
headspace, yeah. The headspace is the term given to the space at the top of the pot. The space between the rim of the pot and the top of the soil surface.
Okay.
And I rarely see this written about, but over the years, I've noticed a correlation between plants that are doing poorly and a deep headspace. Okay, so the space up at the top of the pot is just too deep. Okay, that does a couple of things. It prevents the soil surface in that pot from drying out. There's less air exchange because the potting soil is sunken down in quite a ways. And insects and disease can kind of flourish down in that wetter area. So the plants aren't drying out quite as good. Also, because you're not using the full pot depth, if that makes sense, you're not giving it the full soil volume. There's less root space there. And actually, if you have a higher soil profile, gravity helps pull water down through the soil, and you get better drainage, better oxygen exchange. So in other words, if you're not filling that pot up to its full potential, just leave just enough at the top so that when you water, it doesn't run over the sides. But leave a little catch basin up there. But filling the pot up with soil instead of having the plant way down in there, if I'm describing this in a way that you can visualize.
Yeah.
So anyway, again, I've just noticed the danger and that plants oftentimes tend to not do so good. So anyway, Red, after he had heard that or read it, I think I had written a column about that. We might have, when we talked houseplants, described that too. So anyway, Red had some of his plants that weren't doing well, and he noticed that headspace was too deep. His soil was down too far. Well, when I talk about headspace, you can't always just add soil at the top because that could get the plant too deep and you could get rotting on the leaves and stems. Yeah, exactly. You can't bury the plant. So I always suggest that you take the plant out of the pot, add the soil down in the bottom of the pot, and then put the plant back in so you'll get that proper headspace. Red had a few really, really big plants that were going to be difficult to take out and put some down in the bottom to raise it on up. And so I suggested to him when I took a look at him, you can add a little bit to the top, a little bit, depending on how the plant kind of looks. So if you aren't going to bury it down in, you can increase it a little bit at the top. And so some of his plants, I recommended that he could add some to the top as well on those big plants. So it's interesting. You rarely see that written or discussed, but I've just noticed it. Plants that are failing, when people send me emails right away, I look, oh, wow, that's a really, really deep headspace, and no wonder it's failing.
I think about that with some plants that I have and had, and yeah, I think
the same is true outdoors with outdoor planters. Sometimes I see people, and I mean, I've made this mistake in the past. That's why I preach on it, because I've made all these mistakes. And okay, I sometimes notice that in people's outdoor planters. They haven't filled, before they put the plants in, they haven't filled it all the way up with soil. It's maybe sunk down, 2-3 inches below the pot rim, but fill it all the way up. Again, it'll settle when you water it.
Right, exactly.
Leave just enough to water so it's not flowing over the edge. But you'll have more root space. They won't dry out quite as rapidly. And so even outdoors, use that proper headspace. If you were to measure the proper headspace, I call it about 1/2 inch.
Okay.
would be a proper headspace.
Yeah, because if you're watering more than
so
that,
I preach about that, but it's one of those little things that make a big difference.
Yeah. Just a simple little thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, so I preached and I rambled about it, but it is important.
Well, one more question for the day. Susan writes, I have 3 pots of geraniums that I've had for over 40 years that I winter. The
Isn't that
emphasis there
amazing?
was my emphasis.
40-year geraniums.
Yes.
That's awesome.
She winters in her house in a window that gets morning sun. Is it too early to cut them back to 4 inches? So here we have a question about,
Wintering
early
geraniums.
in time and,
Yeah.
yes. But
so isn't that
it's too
awesome?
back.
And that's a good example of how you can bring the geraniums in each year and put them back out in the summertime. And she's been doing that for 40 years. But what she does is she indicates she cuts them back before they go out. And so she's kind of wondering, it looks like they need to kind of get cut back. Is it too early? Okay. A target date that I use when we cut back our own overwintered geranium is about March 1st.
Okay.
So, yeah, she's right on. Yeah, she said they kind of look like they need cutting back. And, yeah, at a certain point, they start looking indoors, they're too big, and cutting back, 3 to 4 inches above soil level, you might be cutting off all the leaves. So all that's left is stems, and that's okay. Pretty soon, they start sending out new little geranium leaves, and by May, when it's time to go back outside, they're a nice, full, bushy plant again. So, yeah, isn't that awesome? And also, I should mention that when you do cut them back, now is a good time to fertilize. Geraniums respond really well to a water-soluble type fertilizer. The days are getting longer, so her plants in the window know that the days are getting longer. And so cutting them back, giving them some extra nutrition will help spur the good dense growth that we all look for.
And when the weather's finally good enough to put those outside, Susan's going to have a head start on all of us because she's going to have these geraniums that are just ready to go.
But isn't it, as I always say, we're all in this together. And isn't it awesome? We get from Susan writing in 40-year geraniums.
Yes.
That just, it's such a good confirmation of what gardeners can do.
And like you said,
so she got her money's worth when she bought those geraniums.
Well, and like the points that you were talking about headspace, some of these can be very simple things that this isn't necessarily always brain surgery. You should, ask questions to you. This is a great
and experience is the best teacher.
Yeah.
Like I say, I'm able to speak well because I've made every mistake in the book.
Well, so if people have more questions for you, what is the best way to reach you?
Always love to hear the emails. When things go very, very well or when things don't go so well, it's fun. We all share the information. And so send me an email, donald.kinsler, KINZLER, at ndsu.edu. And photos are awesome. I love cell phone. That's the reason I love cell phones the most, is because they take really good photos.
All right, Don, this has been great so much. Thank you, and have a happy and a great Leap Day.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks, everyone, for listening.